So, I'm Naomi, and I'd like to talk about the meat industry in America. I don't like it, and I'm going to tell you why I care and why I hope that some of you will at least think about caring about it a little more. And there are 4 key components to why I'm concerned about it: harm to animals, health in America, climate change, and global food insecurity. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, 55 billion land and sea animals are killed every year for meat consumption in the United States. To put that in perspective, the estimated number of humans to have ever lived on Earth is 107.6 billion, or equivalent to about 2 years of animals killed in meat production in our country. We eat a lot of meat. Now, 55 billion animals being killed, that's a lot. To be more precise, 2.3 million sheep and goats, 33.2 million cattle, 112 million pigs, 239.4 million turkeys, and 8.6 billion chickens per year. The rest are fish, but for now I'll concentrate on land animals, and I'll begin talking about these animals themselves and their physical well-being. In an ASPCA poll, 94% of Americans agree that animals raised for food deserve to live free from abuse and cruelty. Yet, the majority of the nearly 10 billion farm animals raised each year in the US suffer in conditions that consumers would likely not accept if they could see them. Like physical alterations, like teeth clipping, tail docking, or castration performed without anesthetic. Indoor confinement with poor air quality and unusual light patterns, use of cages and overcrowding, inability to engage in natural behaviors, and breeding for fast growth or high yields of meat, milk, and eggs that compromise their physical and mental stability, neglect of sick and suffering animals, often due of high ratios of animals to workers, misuse of antibiotics to compensate for unsanitary conditions, rough or abusive handling by workers, as well as inhumane slaughterhouse conditions in not all but many instances. Now, I think that we don't see agricultural animals as beings at all, more like resources to be used. And that really bothers me. Now we have industrial slaughterhouses that are part of a $1.02 trillion industry. And recall those common abuses inside factory farms? Well, 95% of agricultural animals in the United States are raised in these factory farms, which maximize profit at the expense of most else. Efficiency and profit trump welfare and ethics. Now, I really love animals, so that breaks my heart. And while I could go on about the philosophy of animals for a good long while, I think the general public might agree that it's good to minimize these kinds of things, especially for animals who have really complex social lives. I mean, animals are not things, they have social instincts. Keep in mind, pigs are smarter and more trainable than dogs. According to a 2009 study by Cambridge professor Donald M. Broom, they often outperform 3-year-old children on cognition tests. In the wild, they live in hierarchical societies like elephants. Scientific evidence points to the conclusion that they dream and see in color and can recognize themselves in a mirror. What I mean is, they're not just breathing hunks of meat. Pigs have a lot in common with their own dogs, and as the common idiom goes, dogs are a man's best friend. Why can't pigs be at least treated more humanely in these farms? Unfortunately, there's little to no protection of animals on farms. The only federal law that affects agricultural animals is the Humane Methods of Livestock Slaughter Act, which requires the livestock quickly be rendered insensible to pain before being slaughtered. However, this law exempts all poultry, as well as certain forms of religious slaughter, such as kosher and halal. While I greatly support legislation like the HMLS Act, it is far from adequate in protecting the lives of animals before they are slaughtered. In this way, I feel like the meat industry as it exists in America violates the rights of animals as beings that experience pain by subjecting them to cruelty. This is the first and a reason that really hits home for me as to why I don't support the meat industry. So, I really care about animals, but humans also really struggle as a result of the meat industry. According to the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, meat consumption in the United States has doubled in the last century. The average American eats 3 times more meat than the global average. Meat is pretty bad for us, and even though it can sometimes provide nutritional benefits and taste good, the types of meat and ways that our society eats meat wreck our constitution. Studies give several reasons that meat may increase health risks. High saturated fat and cholesterol content, high energy density, carcinogenic compounds found in processed meat and formed during high temperature cooking, a compound called L-carnitine in red meat that may promote plaque buildup in the arteries, and the lack of health protective plant foods in high meat diets. While it might sound like that was just a list of vaguely pretentious words, I promise that the effects of meat are real and have serious impacts on us and are a key part in one of the biggest health concerns facing our nation. We are in the midst of an obesity crisis in the United States, one that has a lot to do with both socioeconomic class and meat. Obesity is the second highest cause of preventable deaths in the United States, as the CDC and other organizations espouse that it causes heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancer, all which lead to hundreds of thousands of preventable premature deaths. According to the Food Research and Action Center, low-income and food-insecure families are especially vulnerable to poor nutrition and obesity. Areas without access to nutritious foods, called food deserts, are chock full of big-name meat-based fast food companies such as McDonald's or Chick-fil-A. Companies like these sell meat that is high in saturated fat, sodium, and cholesterol, all leading causes of obesity. According to Time magazine, 40% of Americans eat fast food on any given day, meaning that fast food can be a really substantial portion of the aforementioned huge amount of meat that Americans eat. Now, here's where it gets bad. According to a study done by the University of Adelaide, meat availability accounts for 50% of obesity variation, equal to the influence of sugar on the diet and on health. But to reiterate, Americans eat basically the most meat out of any country. And according to the Global Agriculture Project, the average American eats 220 pounds of meat a year. That is a lot, especially compared to the international average of only 75 pounds of meat per person per year. The United States Department of Agriculture has conducted studies showing that the typical American diet falls significantly short of meeting recommendations for vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. If we were to substitute the sheer amount of meat we consume for whole foods, the generation would be far less affected by obesity. But for many people, the idea of replacing $5 of McNuggets with $5 of apples just isn't feasible, given the local availability and price per unit. People who don't have as high of an income just can't afford to eat healthy, even if it could add years to their life. Again, this goes back to the fact that virtually all of meat is made with an emphasis on profit. Meat is incredibly overproduced in America to a point where it can be far cheaper than healthier proteins and vegetables, and therefore more accessible to all, especially low-income communities, making them targets for cheap, incredibly unhealthy fast meat. Already, I hope you can see how the mistreatment of farm animals is really due to this insatiable demand for cheap meat in this class-driven obesity epidemic. I'm a big believer in the notion that the solutions to every injustice in the world are bound together. So animal cruelty, public health, like even classism, they all stem from this root greed that I refuse to believe is inherent in humanity. But there's another, perhaps even more critical issue that's also interconnected with these: climate change. Now, I feel like most Park students understand the severity of climate change, but just to reiterate, it really sucks. It's predicted that if we keep up the rate of gas emissions and deforestation, that a quarter of Ocean City will be underwater by the time we're in our 50s. It's also predicted that all the ice in the Arctic will be gone by the time we're in our 40s. All the rainforests will be gone too in about 100 years. While it oftentimes does not seem as pressing an issue as the border wall or healthcare, trust me, if we are not careful, in a couple decades it will be virtually the only issue. And you might be thinking, but what's that got to do with the meat industry? And a lot. First, deforestation is one of the most critical problems facing our world. CO2 emissions have already crippled many urban areas by displacing oxygen in the atmosphere. As trees are a primary absorber of CO2, cutting down huge old-growth forests quickens and makes more severe the effects of greenhouse gases on every living being. South American rainforests account for producing 20% of the world's oxygen. And deforestation not only reduces oxygen production, but displaces the habitats of millions of species. 70% of Earth's land animals and plants live in forests, the majority of which cannot survive or adapt quickly enough, causing mass extinctions. Indigenous tribes also, who live in tropical South America, are also irreparably damaged and often forced to integrate into contemporary society due to the loss of their homeland. We lose 18.7 million acres of forest per year, which is equivalent to 27 soccer fields per minute. About half of the world's tropical forests have already been cleared, and in as little as 100 years, if trends continue, rainforests may be completely decimated. And do you know what the single biggest cause of tropical deforestation is? It's livestock agriculture. Cattle ranching now covers 80% of the destroyed Amazon. Another huge driver of deforestation is the growth of soybeans, almost 90% of which go towards feeding animals. But deforestation is far from the only environmental impact the meat industry causes. Methane, a gas produced in large part from an excess of bred livestock, is 86 times more potent than CO2. 55% of water in the United States is used for factory farming, and the runoffs from these factories contaminate our beautiful waterways with nitrogen and phosphate. The evidence is clear that mass animal consumption is not the only, but one of the leading causes of reduced biodiversity, water pollution, and deforestation, which are all causes of catastrophic global warming. And finally, another huge global problem due in large part to the meat industry is the global food shortage. Our world is headed towards a food security crisis. About 12% of the world's populace goes hungry every year, and with an expected 9.8 billion humans inhabiting the world by 2050, food demand is predicted to be 60% greater than it is now. We need more food to fill all these people, and the fact is that meat, well, filling is not a sustainable agricultural practice for this. 1/3 of all food is wasted, and climate change, urbanization, water shortages, pollution, and soil degradation, reducing the amount of food able to be produced, the situation seems quite dire. While a feasible alternative to shrinking lands may seem to be consuming animals, I assure you meat consumption threatens our food security more than it helps ensure it. A kilogram of beef is about 30 times more demanding on the environment than a kilogram of plant protein. An acre of land can produce 53,000 pounds of essential potatoes and only 137 pounds of beef. Raising animals covers 30% of the land on Earth. 30%! If that land was utilized in making more productive environmental plant-based foods, world hunger would almost certainly be greatly diminished. The top 3 meat-consuming countries in the world are Australia, America, and Israel. If every country, especially densely populated ones such as India or China, were to consume around 200 pounds of meat per capita, the results in terms of the demand on global resources would be utterly catastrophic. 9 billion people are going to inhabit this world in our lifetimes, and we need to do something about it if we want to help our fellow human beings not starve to death. I think that ending cattle farming and using that incredible amount of land to produce 30 times the amount of plant-based food would solve this problem. Now, if you're anything like me, all of this really pisses you off. How is our world this messed up? I mean, animals being treated with cruelty, people dying of meat-based obesity, low-income families essentially forced into eating unhealthy by big businesses, deforestation, pollution, world hunger killing millions. It's really messed up. But the good thing is, you can in fact help. Every injustice in the world is bound together. One person's dietary choices don't make a huge sprawling impact. It's true. But even one drop of water creates a ripple. Going fully vegetarian or vegan is daunting, though. I don't want to lie and make it sound like it's a cakewalk, because it's not. I became vegetarian in 2nd grade, and I went vegan a few months ago. And it's kind of been a struggle, not gonna lie. It requires some lifestyle changes, but if I didn't believe in the overall negative impact of the meat industry, it would have been really challenging. But The fact is, the meat industry is killing us, killing animals, and killing the world. So I'm encouraging you, especially heavy meat eaters among us, to adopt Meat-Free Monday. Many colleges promote this as well, or trying to go vegetarian or vegan for a week just to see what that would be like for you. No pressure at all, just if what I said spoke to you or affected you, consider trying an alternative diet out. It's your decision, and you have power over what you support or don't support through your actions. Every accomplishment starts with the decision to try. Thank you.